And tonight is part one on a man named Conrad Lehn. And I'll talk about why we chose him and give kind of a background on what he's done here in the community and the places that you go into in town that he built that you really may not know about. We're pleased tonight to have very special guests here. Michael Schroeder. Let's stand up, just give a quick wave.
Hello.
You are the great-great-grandson of Conrad Lehn, right?
Correct.
Great-great-grandson of Conrad Lehn.
Yeah.
His wife, Cheryl, is here tonight. Grandson, Alex.
Alex Schroeder.
Alex Schroeder, and Julie Clark from Jackson. So you have come up from Toledo area?
Yes. We did. Three of us did.
Yeah, from Toledo.
Yeah.
Okay, and you'll see in the presentation how this one family, couple of families, the Lehn family bolted off to Ohio. They traders, they went down there and stayed down in Ohio. But anyways, we're glad to have you here tonight. Thanks for coming. And I first met them, I'm going to guess it's in the springtime, when Sue called me from her shop one day. And I was up here at the KJ house just by coincidence. She says, I have this family in my shop. They're from Ohio, and they say they're related to Conrad Lehn. She says, do you know who he is? I says, I'll be right down there. Keep them there. And I just basically explained to him at the time that he is one of the prominent people in Manchester of the 19th century, although it may not be very well known today. And I asked them, where did you eat lunch when you're up here? And they said, well, I ate that place over there called the Black Sheep Tavern. I said, well, Conrad built that building. They were thrilled about that. And he's mentioned on one of the plaques in town. But what we want to do tonight was talk in more detail about Conrad Lehn, what he did, what he caused in terms of moving the community. And so that's what I'll get started with here now. So we found one photograph of him. I did not have time to go through all of our photo archives up in the, right now still in the blacksmith shop, but coming over here eventually. We have drawers and drawers and drawers of old photographs of people that are not indexed. And someday I have to go through those photographs and see if I can find more of Conrad Lehn. But we did find this one picture here. And, oops, I want my, why is it running off the screen there? Oh well, let's go on here. Nope, that's not good. Excuse me a minute while I fix this. There we go. Okay. So why is Conrad Lehn what we call a 19th century mover? He is the first German merchant in Manchester. So from 1833, when the John Gilbert and the Fargos and the Keefes came here, they are all what we call English. They came out of New York State. They came out of New England. They were the English. And Conrad Lehn was the first German to come in here. So he encountered, that first move in here, a different culture. He had to fight against the English culture coming in here, so he's German. Number two, he's Catholic. Unheard of in that time period. Everybody in town was Methodist, Episcopal, Presbyterian. So now you got a Catholic coming in here. And he had to work a little bit to get himself ingrained in the community. There was no Catholic church here, no Catholic services at that time. Not quite sure where he went to church for the first 15 years or so. But more importantly, if you followed Matt Blosser, the publisher and the editor of the Enterprise for 72 years, the post-Civil War was a boom to Manchester, an economic boom. The post-Civil War period, the economy was just going crazy. The merchants were making tons of money. The government had bought everything that farmers could produce for the war. And Matt Blosser took over the Enterprise in 1868, and he started a campaign called Let's Build Up the Town, literally. Because the north side of Main Street was pretty much all burned down in the 1853 mill. So you had a lot of vacant spaces there. All the buildings on the Main Street and the south side were all 1830s, 1840s. And so he launched this campaign, Let's Build Up the Town. His goal was to become second to Ann Arbor, if not taking over Ann Arbor, in terms of Washtenaw County. Very ambitious goal. And part of his campaign was to get wealthy merchants or investors to build new buildings downtown. and to build railroads. So he really campaigned for the second railroad coming into Manchester, which he achieved in 1870, and having 2 railroads in a town the size of Manchester is a huge boom. So these 3 things, the first German merchant, a Catholic in an overwhelmingly Protestant community, and becoming a major partner in the Build Up the Town campaign are what make him, in my view, a mover in a town. This is the oldest photograph that we can authenticate of downtown from 1867. And unfortunately, it doesn't show much of the downtown buildings, but I've found some other pictures here that do a lot better job of what he's doing. So, family beginnings. Conrad Lehn was born January 1834 in a town called Kurlach in Baden, or what was then Bavaria. So the Catholic part of it fits. The immigrants coming out of that part of Germany were predominantly Catholic, coming over here. Baptized as Catholic. His first wife, Magdalena Haag, was also born in Kurlach. And they came together, unmarried, on the ship. And they arrived on April 10th, 1854 in New York City aboard this particular ship. And we found the ship registry here. And it shows them coming in, Conrad Lehn and Magdalena Haag, together. This is not that uncommon. We've found in other cases, in my family research I found, where a man and woman came over unmarried and then married here. Okay, so that's kind of an unusual thing, but we did find out they came here April 10th, 1854. We don't know what brought them to Detroit, but they came from New York City to Detroit. It could be that her brother, who's buried down here in St. Mary's also, may have come before them. There could be some clue there, but her brother came over about the same time. They were married January 16th, 1855 in Detroit in a Catholic church. We don't know what church it was. The Archdiocese of Detroit does not have centralized marriage records. So if you're trying to find a marriage record in the city of Detroit, you got to figure out the church, then go to that church, and if they're still active, they may have them there. If not, you got to figure out where the records went to. It's kind of a battle. But we do know they were married in a Catholic church in Detroit. I looked at some online directories, 1855, 1856 in Detroit, could not find them. But we do know that once he got here, he took a position with the Lakeshore and Michigan Southern Railway. And that railway reached Manchester in 1855. So Detroit is, of course, over here. Here's Manchester. And so the Lakeshore Michigan Southern Railway came down this way, and then it came up through Adrian into Manchester. And of course, he's somehow involved in building that railroad. We do have records. He became a foreman on the railroad in 1857. And so whatever his involvement was in building that railroad had brought him to Manchester in 1855. And apparently he decided, this is where I want to be. And he stayed with the Lakeshore and Michigan Railway until 1864, which I think is when the railroad typically got completed. Its entire length running from Detroit down through here and up towards Jackson. That's when it was finished. And for unknown reasons, he decided to become a grocery store owner. So to go from a railroad foreman to a grocery store owner, anyways. He went into business with a man named Fred Kerfus in 1864 in the grocery business. Now the first time we can find him in the census is 1860, and he is in Manchester in 1860. He's living here. I used Ancestry to try to find it. You look up Conrad Lehn, you can't find it. So what you got to do is, in Ancestry, use one of those things where the name sounds like this, it could be like this. I finally found him under Conrad Sane. And there he is, Magdalena's wife, and 3 of the children who had been born at that point. We found a picture of her, Magdalena Haag. So he's living in Manchester in 1860. He's still operating as a railroad foreman, so he must be out on the road quite a bit, doing things at that point in time. And where was he living? Well, if you look at the maps, the 1856 plat map of Manchester is one of the finest we have in detail and accuracy. And he's not on that one. So I don't know if he's not living here in 1856. But the 1864 Manchester map is the next map. This is unfortunately the poorest of the maps that we have. When they made this map, it's sloppy. It's nowhere near as neat as the other ones. But he is on here. And to get your name on the business directory, you had to pay money for that. So he paid money to advertise himself, but for some reason the map maker left off what he was doing. So my guess is he's trying to promote the fact that he's starting a grocery business in town. And he was left off, but it does show where he lived. Conrad Lehn, here, right here, at the corner of Vernon and Beaufort Street. And that location is where the Donnellan family lives. If you know the Donnellan house, big white house, the Ackerson School Complex is right here. So that white house, which is for sale right now, that's the location where Conrad Lehn was in 1864, apparently trying to advertise, paying money. Hi, I'm here. Doesn't say what he's doing, but it tells him where he's living. And we found a bird's eye view, which we made into a card, which is for sale in our rack over there. Here's the house. So a bird's eye view photograph was made of this thing. I don't know the exact date on this, but this is the original house that was there. This is where he was living. And I read somewhere, kind of a brief statement, that he started his grocery business at this house. Because they talked about having a grocery business on the far east side of town. So our guess is that he started his grocery business here in this house, probably in the back area or somewhere, perhaps in a shed. But this, of course, is now Beaufort and Vernon. And if you know where Teresa Heron lives, that's her house right there. So you can kind of orient yourself where they're at. But this house is now gone. But that's his first location. Okay. By 1870, we have the Taylor and Bird map, which is extremely accurate, based upon actual survey data. And he's on here. He's paid to have his name put on there. And now he's down where Riverside's coming down and curving into City Road. And I'll show you the house in a minute. It's still there. Right on that corner, Conrad Lehn. And the best we can figure out, the house was built in 1868. So again, if you use the Manchester Enterprise and you go through, you look for Conrad Lehn, he's got 2 pages. I mean, Blosser wrote about him for 50 years, just all the stuff in there. And I'm sure we would find the exact time, dates that his house was being built. But he's picked his spot down here. He's living down there in the corner. Look at the bird's eye view from 1872. It's right here. This map is extremely accurate. The man who did this bird's eye view walked around town, sketched every single house in 3 dimensions, windows and doors exactly correct. And today we still have people come and look at this map, they find their house and they say, that's my house. The windows, the door, everything's in the perfect spot. So here's the house right here now. He's down, built a house, and it's kind of on a critical junction. Traffic is coming down this way and heading out. So he's got that nice little spot down there. You can get to town pretty quick. So his businesses are down over here. You can get in there pretty quick. Nice place. Okay. There it is today. So if you drive down City Road and bend out towards, heading towards east, the house is there. It was up for sale for quite a while. It just sold, apparently. And where's Lid? It's sold, right? And yep. And so we think that the second level is its own apartment. And we're hoping it gets kind of brought back up, refurbished. But that's Conrad Lehn's house, and very, very prominent spot, very prominent house, and it still exists today. Okay. We saw that he registered for the Civil War when he was here. So he's here in 1863. Another proof he's here in 1863 is that he's registering for, he says he works for the railroad, born in Germany, but as far as we know, he never actually did military service. He simply signed up for it and apparently never got called up. But we did find him in the Civil War registration records. Okay, so 1864. He comes to his first commercial downtown grocery store. He's partnership with Fred Kerfus, and the building is now the Steel Graphics building. Okay, they are in this building, which was built probably late 1850s. Conrad Lehn occupies this left-hand side and runs his grocery store business there. And we can find articles in the Enterprise where Matt Blosser's talking about him being in this storefront on the east side of the river, but he wanted to be where the action really was, on the west side of the river. So we'll get to that in a minute. Here's the 1870 census. Now he's showing up with his name spelt right. Conrad Lehn, grocer. Worth $10,000. He's wealthy. We don't know if he came from Germany with the money or if he made a lot of money in the railroad. But for a person running a grocery store in Manchester, of course, he's built the big white house. He's got $10,000 value there. That's a large number for that time period to be worth, because they were tracking the value of your net assets there. So here he is with Magdalene and the children all listed up here. So he's doing pretty good. All right, 1873 comes. Matt Blosser says, let's build up the town. So he builds his first building with William Kirkgessner. You know this building? Black Sheep, 2 Black Sheep. And the Dance with Hearts studio on the corner there. This was the first new building built on the south side of what was then called Exchange Place, or Main Street, west of the river. Okay, and it's still in fairly good shape. This side was Conrad Lehn's, and this was William Kirkgessner's. And of course they had, well, it started off actually, they actually used this for the store at one point. These were apartments up here. That building is still there. You can walk inside and kind of feel the ambience of it. The 2 buildings were connected through the wall at one point in time. You can walk in there now and see where that was bricked up there, where the 2 buildings were connected. You could put them 2 together. But that's 1873. So this is kind of the peak of the Let's Build Up the Town campaign, because later in 1873 there was an economic catastrophe. We had a Great Depression come upon us. Somehow Conrad Lehn got through it okay. This is from the 1874 Pictorial Directory. It's a great big atlas book of all the plat maps and everything. He paid for an ad. Conrad Lehn, dealer in groceries, provisions, whatever that is, notions, etc. in Manchester. Partner with William Kirkgessner. City bakery, wholesale, retail dealer, and crackers, fine ornamental cakes, confectionery, etc. I like how they always have these people dressed up walking by the stores and everything. So again, here is his store in 1874. He's right in the heart of town. Okay. This is a great photograph we found. This again is the south side of Main Street. Here's his building. It's at that point in time the only new building on the south side. It's a very rare photograph because we don't have many photographs that show the original 1830s, 1840s buildings. So again, the south side of Main Street was not affected by the fire in 1853. The wind blew the fire northwest across Main Street and down the north side and tore everything out the north side down to the Manchester Hotel, which was saved. But these are all 1830s Greek Revival type buildings, and here's his new building, bang, right in the middle of it all. That's called building up the town. And Matt Blosser liked that, and he wanted more of that going on. Okay? Here's another view of it. Now he's got a competitor, Rafus and Cap. So they built the building next to him. We found this photograph. Obviously the building is done here. All the people are out front celebrating, but here is the west half, or the right side, of the Lehn and Kirkgessner building here. City Bakery, rebuilt 1873. Unfortunately, the photographer cut off Lehn's part. But you still see, here's another one of these Greek Revival 1830s buildings sitting down there. That one stayed there till the current post office building was built in the 1930s. That stayed on there for quite a while. But again, another view. It's in the hub of the town, right in the center of the town. Well, he wanted to keep building. So Matt Blosser says, keep building. So in 1881, he built what is now Frank's Place. Okay, this was built by Conrad Lehn, part of his Build Up a Town campaign. Of course, the elegant Manchester Hotel used to be right here. Part of me says, I wish they had never torn that down, but it was in pretty bad shape. Now we got a gas station there. Anyways, Frank's Place was built by Conrad Lehn. We don't know how long he owned it. He financed the construction, and then George Werthner brought his clothing store in there. And if you go in Frank's place now, you see on the wall nice photographs of Werthner's store in there. But that's, again, Conrad Lehn's second building, besides his house. He built this one too. Built this for his son-in-law, Nathaniel Schmid. And Nathaniel Schmid, of course, his son-in-law, married his Conrad Lehn's daughter, but Nathaniel Schmid is the son of Reverend Friedrich Schmid. If you know the German history of like Freedom Township, Reverend Schmid opened up all the churches, Ann Arbor, down in Freedom Township, and brought all the Germans in. Read the Freedom Township history book, you'll learn all about Reverend Friedrich Schmid. Well, his son, Nathaniel, started up a kind of a department store kind of business with a guy named Mack. So it was Mack and Schmid in this building. And what strikes me is, you look at the two buildings, I haven't ever noticed this until I made this presentation, but you look at the two buildings, same plans. He must have the same set of plans and same general layout to the two stores. And so he keeps going. He built these two. This is where Over the Edge is now, across the street. So if you read the history of what we call the life on a Manchester corner, it's on one of these plaques on the wall here, Conrad Lehn built these two buildings. And Matt Blosser praised him for building these two buildings, which had the two storefronts and what Matt Blosser referred to as 4 fine cottages. I think cottage must be a 19th century word for apartment. You know, I didn't take time to check on that, but there's apparently, he built that with 4 apartments above, and Blosser was complimenting him on his apartments. This photograph is from sometime after 1904 because the Kingsley Jenner house is in the picture. So here we are. So it's right across the street there. And those buildings went through several different owners and eventually were torn down in 1939 to build the C.F. Smith grocery store, which disrupted the town. And Matt Blosser, I think, was near the end of his life, but he got upset with the supermarket being built over here and affecting all the business owners downtown. And now that's a great pizza bar restaurant thing. So anyways, he built 5 downtown buildings and his house out there on City Road. So he was a major part of that build up the town effort that Blosser was promoting. He went back to Germany in 1871. Karen and I were on a vacation trip here a few weeks ago where a speaker was talking about how when Germans came to America, the first generation, the actual immigrant, the man always went back. He had to go back to see the family, tell them what he was doing, see how the family's doing. The second generation on never went back. So we found that in 1871, he returned back to Germany with a John Schmidt, who was also living in Manchester. The two of them, I don't know who John Schmidt was, but the two of them went back. And German, Kaufman, he was a merchant, identified himself as a merchant going back to Germany. So he did go back to see what was going on back in Kurlach. He's very politically involved. From the Manchester Democracy, the Live Democrats of Manchester organized a Centennial Reform Club. He became a vice president of this Democratic club. And I like the last sentence. The Democrats of Manchester will be sure to make it thunder in November. Kind of prophetic, I don't know. Anyways, he was quite involved in politics. He's in there with all of the big names. English. He was able to use his Catholicism to kind of work his way into the English society when the Protestant English people rejected him because of the religion. So he's teaming up with different people based upon that religion thing. And here's an example of it, that he is right there in the top of it. This is, I think, from 1873 or 1874, somewhere in there. But I like that last line. I just kind of laughed when I saw that. And part 2, the village of Manchester is formed in 1867. And he's treasurer for 2 years. So he's basically, he's got his grocery business running down here on East Main Street, the first one he's in. He gets elected as treasurer of the village. He's also a trustee of the village down here. So he's at a high position. I think the village was recognizing his wealth and his prominence, and perhaps they're trying to get some diversity by getting the Catholics and the Germans and the Protestants all kind of mixed in together. One interesting thing about him, if you look at these enterprises like this one here, this is the one we printed up for Sesquicentennial, October 7th, 1869. What amazes you is when Blosser's got his paper running, he's about 2 years into running his paper, he's pushing advertising. So, I mean, I love these ads. I mean, they're beautiful ads. All these people drawing pictures and a lot of jokes, a lot of what I call the double entendres in the ads and stuff like that. And I've gone through papers from 1869 to about 1875, nothing from Conrad Lehn. He's not advertising in the paper, which I thought was kind of strange. And I've gone through several of them, and pretty much every merchant in town either had a big ad like this, or they stuck a little thing here on the front page corner over here. He's not in there. It wasn't until the 1880s that I could find him publishing an ad. And by researching it, he was in the grocery business from 1864 till about 1882. And then he retired. And he retired for about a year and a half and just couldn't take it being retired anymore. So he went back into business. And he started up different kind of ventures, and he finally put ads in the paper. Okay, I mean, nothing really special about this ad. There's Conrad Lehn, dealer in groceries, canned goods, crockery, boots and shoes, wallpaper, wooden, willow, tin, and hardware, paints and oils, plows, pumps. Kind of a diverse business there. Come in and see us. We're the cheapest store in town. This was the only time I could find him advertising. Now, he's building the buildings. He's involved in politics. He's well known, but he won't spend his money on advertising the enterprise. I'm sure Blosser was not happy with him not buying ads, but we did find this one later in his commercial life. He was a leader of an organization called the Association of United Workmen. So we know there were tons of fraternal organizations after the Civil War. I mean, all kinds of acronyms. I mean, Masons had 3 or 4 different branches, and you see all these different fraternal organizations, and he formed this one called the Association of United Workmen. August 13, 1878, he's one of the founding members of the AOUW. And so you research what the United Workmen were, and here he is lobbying for the common worker. And I found out that in that time period, an individual, ordinary individual, could not buy life insurance. If you wanted to buy life insurance, only the wealthy people could buy life insurance. Only politically powerful people could buy life insurance. So they formed this Association of United Workmen. And the whole idea was these ordinary workers could come together and they could buy life insurance. And eventually, pretty much all of the organizations of this AOUW turned into insurance companies. So you go online, you track it down there, and you see all these well-known insurance companies in the United States today got their started as a fraternal organization of the AOUW. But there he was involved. He was concerned that ordinary workers could buy life insurance and get a death benefit. That was the key thing. Be able to get a death benefit if something happened to you. Nice write-up in the 1881 Chapman history. I won't read all that, but it's pretty much the facts of how he got here, opening his grocery store, building the buildings, his marriage, his second marriage. He is a man of large influence in Manchester and has been successful in business. Okay, he paid for this. So, I mean, he got somebody to write this for him to get that kind of text in the Chapman history. Of course, part of his grocery store was a saloon. So here's an interesting story. On the first floor of the now 2 Black Sheep building there, he had his grocery store. But the second level was a saloon up above. And he and Kirknesser kind of ran the saloon together. And In the mid-1870s is when the Women's Christian Temperance Union started. So the WCTU starts up, and they start coming around to the saloon owners saying, please cease and desist. Okay, and they identified these 7 target saloons they wanted to stop, and guess who's number 1? So he's running a major saloon on both the first and second floor. So I think the first floor part was behind the grocery store. So if you go into like Two Black Sheep now, you see you go way back in there. It was in there, plus a whole second floor. And of course, Kirk Nestor, his buddy, is also running the bakery saloon. Okay? These guys were good friends. If you go down St. Mary's, they're buried together. So here's Lehn. Lane's probably got the highest spot in St. Mary's Cemetery. And Kirk Nestor is just next to him right there. In what I consider the prime spots in St. Mary's. They're right there. Anyways, these were the 7 saloons, and the WCTU came around, stopped selling. That failed. Then they came around and said, limit it to so many drinks per visit, and don't give it to kids, that kind of stuff. Well, what they would do is they'd limit it to 5 drinks. The person walks out the door, comes back in, a visit starts again. So there's some really interesting stories in the Manchester Enterprise, and we did a talk on this a few years ago called Blogger, Lymph, and Germans in Manchester. And here's Conrad Lehn kind of mixing in here, Catholic or not. I'm running a saloon, and you can't tell me what to do. And he ran a saloon.
How many people lived in Manchester in 1870?
Probably around the same as it is now. Yeah, I think the population stayed pretty steady over all the years.
Okay, I just wonder, because you had 8, is there 8 saloons, 9 saloons?
Oh yeah. There were 8 identified legitimate saloons, yeah. Manchester has traditionally been the wettest town in Washtenaw County. It's got that history, and if you go back into the Prohibition and that period there, I mean, everybody came from all over Washtenaw County to Manchester to get their drinks. We were very, very wet, and it's so whether Conrad's a Catholic or whatever, he has good business. He made good money at that, so he was part of it. So his first wife, Magdalena Lehn, dies in 1873. So he's building his Lehn Kirk Nestor building. He's doing a ton of business, and his son, their son actually, Henry Lehn, died in June of 1873 of typhoid fever. And his wife, Magdalena, dies about a month later of typhoid fever. So obviously, I don't know what the current term is for typhoid fever, but you see all sorts of deaths occurring in the latter part of the 19th century in Manchester from typhoid fever. So both his son and his wife passed away in 1873. And this is the gravestone in St. Mary's Cemetery. And like I say, I think it's one of the prime spots. But anyways, this is where they're buried in St. Mary's. And this is the stone where she's, the date of death here and her age, and their son, Henry or Heinrich, who died a month before. There's a poem underneath here which you'd probably have to do some sort of rubbing on to try to figure out what it says. I didn't try to do that, but they left some sort of a message to people there. So right in the middle of all the stuff he's got going on with the business and everything, Magdalena passes away. And he marries for the second time a woman named Catherine Metzke. Her maiden name was Reiter. She was a widow living in Brooklyn. Brooklyn's the next town west of here, down the ways a bit. And they got married in 1874. Her first husband is buried in Oak Grove Cemetery. We found his stone here, William Metzke. And I know you can't read it here, but we actually found the obituary from 1924 that talks more about her background and coming in here. But they married in 1874. And let's go through the children here real quickly. So from his first marriage to Magdalena, he had 6 children. 2 died young. The 4 girls who were left, Caroline married a William Arnold. We haven't found too much about William Arnold. I think he went to Detroit, from what I can recall. Second child married Nathaniel Schmid, who was a very prominent person in Manchester. He was a merchant, ran Mack and Schmid, which eventually got so big it moved to Ann Arbor. So Mack and Schmid was a big store in Ann Arbor for many, many years. And so he, as I mentioned before, he built what it was the Steel Graphics building into a store for his son-in-law to use. Elizabeth married William Lair. That name is also quite prominent in Manchester history. Wilhelmina married Charles P. Vogel. Charlie Vogel was very prominent in Freedom Township. If you go to the Albert Orchard and Cider Mill on Bethel Church Road and you go about a half-mile east where it bends around Silver Lake, there's a great big huge white house right there. That was Charlie Vogel's place. It was a tavern, a saloon, a meeting place for the Germans in Freedom Township. And when we did the Freedom Township history about 10 years ago, we found a lot about Charlie Vogel. Quite a prominent guy, he's well written up. And it was where the Germans came to socialize, and they got into a lot of trouble because they did it on Sunday. And the officials did not like the Sunday part, especially the church officials. And the church officials tried many, many times to shut down Charlie Vogel's place in Freedom Township, and didn't work. Not with the supervisors, and the board's all German. They're not going to try to shut him down. With Catherine Ryder-Metzke, he had 3 children. Bertha, from whom the Schroeders are descended. They went to Toledo. They fairly quickly went down to Toledo. Eleanor married Lynn Hardenberg, and I know there's a lot of Hardenbergs still around the Manchester area. I think they ended up pretty much in Brooklyn. And William Conrad married Bernice Holmes, and they went to Detroit. And you can find a lot about them in Detroit. So there were 9 children total. And I mean, if you look at Matt Blosser's Enterprise Index, if you ever looked at it, you know, not Matt Blosser, Alan Dyer's index to the Manchester Enterprise. I mean, I still commend Alan for the decades he must have spent on the detail on that. But Conrad Lehn and the 2 wives and all the children and their spouses take up pages in that index. It would take you a very long time, but you could write a very, very detailed biography of all these families by just picking out, okay, 1875, June 20th, page 3, column 1. Go on, you can see all the papers scanned online. They're all available online. Go in there and you find out it's a 1-sentence thing that Conrad Lehn's daughter is at the grocery store today. A lot of 19th century Twitter is on there. But I don't know how Matt Blosser did this, but he was tracking everybody, what they're doing, who's visiting them, what Conrad Lehn has in his store, where he got it from, what town, and why it's better than Joe Schmidt's. And then next week Joe Schmidt says, wait a minute, I got a better thing than that. So I did copy one thing, and this is to give to you. This is Matt Blosser's write-up on the wedding of your great-grandmother, Bertha, to William Schroeder of Toledo, February 24th, 1903. And
She would have been my grandmother.
Bertha is
Bertha's my grandmother.
Bertha's your grandmother.
Right, and Bertha and my grandfather William had 3 children.
Okay.
John and William and Eleanor. And then we're descended from them.
So you're just a grandchild of...
Well, don't, Bertha was my grandmother.
Yeah.
Tom would be my great-grandfather.
Yeah, okay.
Right, and then Julie's great-great-grandfather, and Alex's great-great-grandfather.
Oh, okay. Great. Okay.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's amazing what Matt Blosser would do. He's got to publish this weekly newspaper, and he writes up almost a whole page there, a whole column on the wedding and all the wonderful things that went on and who threw what flowers and the train came and got them and this kind of stuff. So if you ever have time, I can give you a printout of the Lehn Index. And the Manchester Enterprises from 1867 to 1919 are all available online. And you use the index and you go online to this website and it gives you the decade, then the year, then the month. And you go down there and you can pull it up and then you can enlarge and cut and paste and find all kinds of stuff about the family. And it's amazing. We're very fortunate to have that particular thing available to us. But all these people in here are all in there over and over and over again. So it's a project for you if you ever have the time for it. We did find this picture in our file, Eleanor and Wilhelmina Lane. And like I say, we still have to go through our files up there. And we've got so many pictures up there that just have to go through them someday. It's going to take time, but they're there. And you guys remember back in Sesquicentennial a couple of years ago, Nathaniel Schmid, so Conrad's son-in-law, in 1921, wrote a poem called "Those Were the Days" about walking through town in 1871, 50 years before that. And he's literally walking down Main Street and talking about everything that was there in 1871. So he comes all the way down from the Manchester Hotel, all the way down, crosses over to the blacksmith shop somewhere down there, cuts down the street, comes back up, does City Road here, comes back down the other side and goes down side streets. And of course, I know you can't read it from here, but his Conrad Lehn store is here. It's the one, that's the first one he was in, where Steel Graphics is now. And this is a tremendous tool to identify what was where in 1871. He did this 50 years later, all from memory. So that's how we know him from, and we copied this out of the 1967 Centennial book. So thought that was neat, something that Nathaniel contributed. We found this, a note from Conrad Lehn written December 1890 to his daughter Wilhelmina. And he's enclosing $2, $1 for Wanda, I think it's Wanda, and $1 for Vernon. I presume that's Wilhelmina's children. Hope they enjoy their Christmas. I'm not well yet, but I'm doing better. I can be at the store about 4 or 5 hours a day. And so he's actually signed this on December 25, 1890. Okay, he's not doing well. And we found his second wife, Catherine's writer Metzke's gravestone. It's also in St. Mary's. Unfortunately, the name is spelled wrong, Catherine, and nobody came back and finished the dates. So maybe there's a project for you someday. Come in and chisel. I think it's 1924, I think is the date, but finish off the stone. This is in the Conrad Lehn grave plot. So there's her and Magdalena and the 2 children who died young. I think there's somebody else in there. We found this. He died February 20th, 1891, so just a couple months after he wrote that note. Very brief. Typically back then, death notices were very, very brief. He died of dropsy at the age of 57. So what's dropsy? It's not a cause of death, it's a symptom. It's a buildup of fluid, edema.
Congestive heart failure.
Congestive heart failure, yeah. So they had not defined congestive heart failure in that time period, but that's what he had. But on the same issue of the Enterprise, he wrote the obituary. And to get an obituary this long in Matt Blosser's paper in 1890s was a great honor. So I know you can't read it all, but he's got everything in here. The interesting thing about this, and I don't mean this to be hurtful to the second wife's family, but the children of the first wife, Magdalena, all the children are individually named and where they lived. The children of second wife, Catherine, he had 3 children. So you wonder, is Matt, who did he talk to? Why did he write it that way? Why didn't he elaborate on the second family as compared to the first family? But you see this a lot in there where the editor of the paper, in the way he writes, makes editorial statements of some sort. And I don't know if he was on the outs with Catherine or what, but anyways, it was just kind of a brief thing. And on the signs that we have around town, and which we have copies of here on the wall, when we did these in 2017, we do have a little bit about Conrad Lehn, first German merchant coming into town on Exchange Place, being involved in Exchange Place. So that's out there. And then finally, his gravestone. It's marked on that same stone, engraved in there. So We will continue to look for more pictures of him. Our idea is to have more talks of this type. I think part 2 of our series is going to be Matilda Wilson Kingsley. The more I find about Matilda Wilson Kingsley, it's just incredible. She's married to John Kingsley, so John Kingsley, of course, is mayor, first electric plant in Manchester, big investor in town, all sorts of stuff. But Matilda was a worker in her own right, and a very strong advocate of women's rights. She was the founder of all the women's rights movements here in Manchester. Clearly had feuds with her husband. We can find things in the Enterprise where Blosser's trying to be very polite about it, you know. The women are getting together to talk about voting and other rights that they have. And it took Blosser a long time to kind of come around, but he wrote a lot about her. She was she was on the school board and the first school board female president in Manchester. Their granddaughters, who are both 90, have visited here a couple of times. And the next time they come here, we're going to sit them down and interview them, because they can tell stories about John and Matilda, very unfavorable about Grandpa, grumpy old Grandpa, and very nice stories about Matilda. Okay, so we'll do our second talk sometime in 2020 on Matilda Wilson Kingsley, who she was, how she got here, how she got hooked up with John Kingsley, and from what we can gather, they basically led a separate life. The last 20 years of their life, they're living in this house, but that's about it. She was doing her own thing, and he was doing his thing, and so we'll talk about that. So, anyways, that's our first try at this kind of talk. Hope you enjoyed it, and thank you. Do we have any